It was getting cold for late October and he felt it would be time to get some new clothes for the fall and winter. Online shopping appealed to him since he had the time in his office and didn't much like going to the mall. It was nice that he worked alone so he could adjust his schedule as needed. Before he started shopping, he went back to check his old email. He had recently subscribed to a magazine and somehow was now getting emails about subscriptions to Vanity Fair magazine and recalled one in particular. It was an email praising a new advance in interactive advertising. It encouraged him to look at the slick ads from Vanity Fair's advertisers online. All of the magazine's advertising was available to scroll over. Once you scrolled over an item, the ad would display the brand and the price of the particular item. Of course, most of the items were women's clothes, shoes, and accessories. The concept intrigued him and he decided to check it out. Maybe other magazines and catalogs were doing this and it would make his shopping a whole lot easier. He spent about a half hour looking through all the great things you could buy online just by searching through the ads. He knew that most of the ads were for women's items, but deep down inside that what was part of the intrigue. He loved everything about women's clothes and accessories. He even liked to dress like a woman when the chance arose. He rarely got the chance to dress up anymore and thought he had finally kicked the habit, but then he got an idea. Why not purchase a new fall and winter wardrobe, buying all women's clothes instead of men's clothes? Just the thought of buying a whole new feminine wardrobe for the first time in years appealed to him. No one would know if he sent everything to his office and limited his shopping to the web. Secretly accomplishing the task would not be easy. Would people be suspicious if everything was sent to the office and he was the only person in the office? Creating a feminine version of himself might solve the problem. It would fool delivery people and anyone that inquired about his packages if they thought he hired a new receptionist. He chose the name Heather for this mythical receptionist since it was the name he liked to use when he dressed up. First, Heather needed an online identity. The two basics for shopping were a company credit card and an email address. Heather's online identity was quickly born. He knew that you had to go to great lengths if you wanted to keep your dressing a secret. He was partially relieved when he went home that night knowing that he had to wait for the credit card before he could start shopping. It meant he had a couple days to change his mind and not go through with his silly wardrobe plans. Other times he had gotten carried away and ended up buying all sorts of lingerie, shoes and clothes, many of which didn't fit properly or go together well. If things progressed like they usually did, he would change his mind in a day or two anyway, and he could chalk up the afternoon to a few hours of fantasizing. The next couple days passed, and instead of forgetting about Heather, he kept wishing he had thought of this great plan sooner so he could have dressed up for Halloween. He spent the days thinking about what he could have been if he started a couple weeks earlier. He used to fantasize about being a cheerleader, but now a French maid or a beautiful bride was all he could think about. Yes, he thought, if I had the time I would have bought everything I needed to be a beautiful bride. He had never worn a wedding dress but could just imagine what it felt like to have a gorgeous dress on with tons of tiny buttons up the back and layer upon layer of silk, satin and tulle flowing from a full-length gown. Thinking about all these great costumes excited him so much he went online to see what was available and put together some fun costumes. He went looking for a French maid costume. Heather found the perfect uniform. It was a short-sleeve black satin number complete with petticoat. She continued shopping for the complete look, eventually finding some black ruffle hipster panties from Victoria's Secret and some black seamed nylons. She went to the Fredericks of Hollywood website and selected a wig, breast forms, 4-inch high heels and a black satin corset. Shopping for the ensemble was the most fun she had had in a while. She had no intention of buying anything since the new credit card hadn't yet arrived, but it was a thrill just to shop even though it required most of her day. It took so long that a wedding dress would have to wait for another time. Later that week, Heather's new credit card arrived. He threw the card in the trash just as he thought he would earlier. He knew he would not be going back to buy the things he looked at the other day, besides those weren't Heather's style, at least not at work. No, Heather would demand clothes appropriate for the workplace. He pulled the credit card out of the trash and began to search for more acceptable attire. Unexpectedly, the desire to create a new feminine wardrobe didn't fade. At first he couldn't believe he had gone so far as to create a new employee credit card. However, the more he thought about it, the more he was convinced this was the best idea he'd had in years. If he was going to have a new receptionist, he was going to have to get her everything she needed. He started by ordering the basics from an office superstore: a desk, a chair, and all the necessary desk accessories. When he really thought about it, he knew a new employee would need a phone, a computer, and maybe even a new cell phone. He also made sure he ordered up a few mirrors to put around the office so he would be able to admire his new receptionist. A receptionist would be a nice addition to the quiet office. He began to daydream about being the new receptionist and what he would have to wear to play that role. The new desk and other items began to arrive over the next week. The various delivery people were interested in all the new stuff and asked him if he had someone new starting soon. He was pleased to tell them that his new receptionist Heather would be starting in a couple of weeks. It was a good time to be shopping for Heather's new wardrobe. All of the new holiday clothes were in by early November. He knew he couldn't buy just one or two items for fun. He needed to have all the parts together so when he dressed up he would look put together. He had a makeover a few years before and was blown away at how good he looked. He listed everything he would need to be convincing based on his previous makeover. He started at his toes and worked his way up. The first thing he needed to do was to trim his toenails, clean them up, and finish them off with some bright red nail polish. This would be easy since nobody would ever see his toes. Next he thought about his hairy legs. While he loved the feel of shaved legs, he knew he could get away with his legs as they were. He would have to order some nude opaque hose to put on first, and then he could put on another pair of dark hose or thigh highs over them. This was a trick he had learned during a makeover, and he was pleased to put that knowledge to good use. It created a convincing look and his legs were quite nicely shaped as they were. Next came the shoes. Heather wouldn't wear stilettos to the office. He would have to find some fashionable work shoes for her to wear. He knew he was a 10.5 in women's shoes, which wasn't too big if you wanted the latest fashion. Like the Brian Atwood 4-inch pumps he saw online the other day. He turned his attention to the midsection. He had worn some fabulous corsets in the past, and while they shrunk his waist down to what had to be 26 to 28 inches, it was too much for every day. Heather would never put up with that, he thought. A waist snipper with attached control panty would be in order to provide an hourglass look, and some control were needed. A garter belt would also be purchased because you never know when a certain pair of thigh highs might fit the mood. He also decided on using C-cup breast silicone forms and a push-up bra. He almost forgot about Heather's nails. Would it be the right time to try some fake nails? He knew with some longer fake nails and some polish his fingers would look great, but he had read this required a lot of work and could damage your nails. He wondered if Heather would approve of long fake nails. No, he thought Heather would definitely want real nails that weren't too long so she could type and do regular work without her nails getting in the way. He decided that maybe he would just let his nails grow a little longer and file them instead of trim them as he had originally planned. If he was going to do that, he would only need nail polish remover. He knew nails didn't make the woman, but jewelry did. Heather would need some clip-on earrings, bracelets, necklaces, and maybe even a couple rings. It was nice knowing that none of it needed to be real, just nicely made. The right jewelry gave a nice finished look to every woman. If jewelry made the woman, makeup didn't hurt. A convincing base that matched his coloring and would cover the hair on his face when shaved was needed. He was lucky not to have too thick of a beard. He also needed a nice rouge to highlight his cheeks, a light eyeshadow for accent, eyeliner, mascara, lip liner, lipstick, lip gloss, and something to remove all the makeup. One of the last items was a proper wig. He looked at his old makeover pictures with several wigs and decided that a mid-length, sandy blonde wig would look best. He had been very methodical about putting his shopping list together, so he thought he should approach his actual purchases with the same kind of careful thought. He decided against his instinct to shop at lots of different stores, getting bits and pieces from here and there. It would be better to shop at department stores where he could pick up the majority of what he needed in one order. It would simplify his shopping and reduce the overall number of shipments. Not all sites would have every exact item, but he was sure they would have enough to make Heather a very happy girl. Sure, some items would come from some obscure specialty sites, but this way Heather would only have a few deliveries. The office was set up for the new receptionist. Heather's computer was set up and personalized in a feminine motif. He decided to do all the shopping from Heather's new computer since all the new purchases were for her. Creating this new person complete with a personalized homepage and email made him feel more and more like Heather, the new receptionist. He couldn't wait to see what she was going to look like. Heather began to place her orders. Heather was shocked that it took almost a day to place most of the orders, but was sure the next time would be much quicker. The next day was Tuesday and Thanksgiving was closing in fast. It was only 2 days away now. It was nice that work slowed down around the holidays because trying to find the right size and style was taking longer than he thought. Heather finished most of her shopping at the next day. She would only be expecting 4 shipments, so her plan of limiting her purchases to a couple sites was successful. The orders were placed. There was nothing that could be done now except to wait. They always say the waiting is the hardest part. The next day Heather was still excited about her orders, but was bored silly waiting for them to arrive. She passed the time surfing the net and was quickly drawn to the Victoria's Secret website. She loved looking at all the playful lingerie. Like the previous sites, she took her time and created a shopping cart to collect all the neat things she would find. She added shoes, panties, nylons, garter belts, and just about anything remotely sexy she found. It was exactly the kind of shopping she wanted to avoid, clearly too impulsive. Instead of jumping to another site, Heather ordered everything in the basket and quickly searched out the French maid uniform she found earlier. Heather's impulses had taken control and she ordered all of the items for the earliest possible delivery. Email confirmations started rolling in from Victoria's Secret and other sites. Including the last-second splurge, the total bill would be at least a few $1,000s. What have I done, she thought. I just added a couple more deliveries and one was coming from Victoria's Secret. It wouldn't be a secret where that came from and people would have a general idea about what was inside. Oh well, nothing to do but wait now, she said to herself. She turned the off computer and left work for the day. Heather came to work at 8 o'clock the next morning. The office she ran would open promptly at 8:30, so she wanted to be a few minutes early to have some time to herself. Visitors rarely stopped in, so it wasn't vital to keep to a strict schedule, but something inside her wanted it that way. She was becoming more confident and assertive in her new role. She hated that she had lost control the day before. She had impulsively purchased a slew of items and shipped them overnight. She was annoyed not only that she had shipped them overnight, but that they were things she didn't need for her new look. What was she going to do at her office with a corset and a French maid uniform? It was already determined that Heather wouldn't wear an uncomfortable corset at the office, let alone a maid uniform. She felt as if she had a hangover, a shopping hangover, and wanted to forget the embarrassing details of the prior day. Today Heather was going to stick to the plan and not let things get out of control again. Shortly after 10 o'clock the first packages started to arrive. The plan today was to unpack, organize, and carefully store all the items of her new wardrobe. It seemed like a simple task at first, just unpack each shipment and dispose of the packaging. Before noon she had received several shipments, including ones from Victoria's Secret and Fredericks of Hollywood. Those would be fun to open, and she put them aside for later and started with another package from her shopping spree. The box she opened from Versatile Fashions contained the black satin French maid uniform. The satin fabric of the uniform felt so sensual she let out a little gasp when she rubbed it between her fingers. She laid the uniform next to her on the floor and opened the white petticoat. The petticoat practically exploded out of its packaging as she pulled open the plastic wrap. The fluffy white petticoat would definitely make her look like a sissy. The thought of it made her blush. She had ordered some opera-length black satin gloves to wear with the outfit to cover her arms just past her elbows. She had tried the gloves before and found they worked exceedingly well. She opened the box with the short blonde wig inside and chastised herself for ordering a wig to go with the fetish maid outfit. It would make her look the part of a sexy maid, but maybe she could use it with her more conservative outfits yet to come. If Heather decided to change her hair someday, which was not out of the question, the wig might come in handy. Heather felt good finding a way to justify the wig purchase, but that soon changed. There was no justification for what came next: a black satin corset with bidirectional lacing in back, hook and eye closure in front, and firm boning. She held up the corset and admired its gleaming satin and 8 garter straps. It was one sexy piece of lingerie, but entirely inappropriate and unnecessary in the office. She carefully put all the pieces of the outfit into a box and put the lid on. She was going to be careful to mark all the boxes so she knew what was in each one. What was she going to write on this one? Anyone that went into the small storage room in the office would see the box on the shelf. On the side that faced the wall she wrote "Sexy French Maid Uniform." On the other side that faced the room she wrote "Emergency Office Supplies." She smiled at the description and hoped she didn't have any emergencies anytime soon. The first package was now unpacked and she set her sights on the Victoria's Secret box and started to pull out its contents. Heather had purchased some of her wardrobe from VS, however this was the prior day's impulse order and subsequent overnight shipment. Each panty, bra, or other item was individually wrapped. This would take a few minutes, she thought. While emptying out the contents, she saw the ruffle hipster panty she had ordered for the maid uniform. She unwrapped the black frilly panties and placed them in the box with the other emergency supplies. The rest of the order was spread out on the floor so Heather could go through piece by piece and decide where everything belonged. As she opened each package, she smirked at how out of control things had become the previous day. All the panties she purchased were size medium. It was the perfect size for her. She liked them just a tiny bit tight to help keep things in place. Red, blue, pink and green were the colors or the day. Her favorite satin panties were from VS, so she could rarely control herself to buying just 1 or 2. She looked at the pile of panties, there 10 pairs total, in a mix of color and styles. Usually bikinis were her style of choice, but she ended up buying a fair number of thongs. She was starting to favor them. Luckily she had only bought half as many bras to match the panties. She didn't feel like she needed any push bras with the new size C breast forms that she had ordered, so bought regular full coverage bras. She liked it when the bra completely covered the breast from. Next she unwrapped a satin and mesh baby doll and a pink satin flyaway baby doll. What was the draw to baby dolls all of a sudden? Her tastes had changed over time, much like the growing preference for thong panties over bikini panties. It could be that the retailers were emphasizing these styles more and she was a sucker for anything feminine they pushed. The last items were a couple pairs of black thigh highs. One's pair was special and had a seam running up the back. This pair was for the maid uniform, so she slipped it in the box in the supply room. She had just closed the box when there was a knock at the door. The door opened slightly and someone called out hello. Her heart started beating fast as she stood frozen in the supply room looking out at the piles of bras and panties on the floor. The door was open partway so the delivery person couldn't see inside, or so she hoped. She raced to the door and signed for the package from Saks. She quickly closed the door behind her and this time made sure it was locked. She turned to survey the office. Lingerie was all over the floor in little piles. Luckily the French maid uniform was out of sight in the storage room. She got lucky this time, but she was going to have to be much more careful in the future. Her cheeks were burning. She was so embarrassed about what had transpired. Caught with pile of bras and panties was not her idea of the perfect day, so she looked through all the email confirmations and tracked the packages to see if anything else was arriving that day. After meticulously checking each email receipt, she knew there wouldn't be any more interruptions that day. Fredericks of Hollywood was the next of her impulse purchases to open. She had mostly kept her cool while shopping at Fredericks, which wasn't easy. It was a great site with steamy pictures of models wearing everything sexy under the sun. The quality wasn't great, and maybe that kept her from getting too undone as she had on other sites. A pair of sea breast forms and a kiwi color satin and lace baby doll were the only things she had ordered. The kiwi color was so bright it was blinding. What was the deal with baby dolls? All the Fredericks items joined the VS Lingerie in a new storage box. Heather wrote on one side of the box bras, panties, and baby dolls, and on the other side wrote surplus supplies. She put the box away in the storage room and moved to open the last remaining item. The final shipment that had arrived and almost ruined the whole day was a small package from Saks. Heather loved almost anything from Saks and Neiman Marcus, but couldn't afford to buy everything she liked there. This package was small, only one item, and was not part of her impulse buying spree. It had just come quickly. This purchase was carefully thought out and picked for Heather to wear most days at the office. It was a pair of Brian Atwood black leather pumps with a 4-inch heel. The 4-inch heel was going to be tough day to day, but she figured she could get more comfortable shoes down the road. The shoes cost over $450 and held some special power just because they were so expensive. They were also special because shoes were one of those items you couldn't just pick up at the mall and say they were for your girlfriend. Shoes that would look and fit well took time to pick, and it was frustrating that she couldn't try them on in public. Heather opened newly arrived package and her day took an unexpected turn. She just couldn't resist and slipped one of the pumps on her feet just to see if it fit. It was a tiny bit tight in dress socks, but she had a feeling it would fit perfectly if she were wearing nylons. She glanced at the clock. It was only a little after 1. She had plenty of time to slip on some nylons and then try the shoes. Her work clothes wouldn't arrive for a day or two, so if the shoes didn't fit right, she could return them and order some new ones. Although the door was locked, she was shaking nervously when she removed her clothes. Standing in only a pair of briefs and socks, she evaluated the boxes in the storeroom and opened the surplus supplies to get a pair of pantyhose. After some brief looking, she remembered that her pantyhose had not arrived yet, so she only had thigh highs to wear, and they were not the stay-up kind. She had specifically purchased these to go with a garter, but those shoes just had to go on her feet with some nylons, so she grabbed a pair to try on. Heather sat in her office chair and slipped the shoes on over the nylons. They felt like a dream. She was going to enjoy walking around the office in these heels. However, she was a little disappointed when she saw her nylons sagging at her ankles. She also caught a glimpse of herself in the new mirror and was distressed at her miserable look. "I can't do these heels justice dressed like this," she thought to herself. There was still plenty of time to kill since it was an afternoon before a holiday and no work would be getting done. She had ordered some garter belts, but not during her harried shopping spree the day before. If she wanted her stockings to stay up, she would have to put on the new corset. It was the only thing she had with garters at the moment. It's easy to justify anything if you think about it long enough. Heather wanted to try on her new shoes, so she needed to put on some nylons, and since she only had thigh highs, she needed a garter belt or a corset with garters to hold them up. All of this seemed perfectly reasonable, so she pulled out the emergency office supplies and retrieved the new corset. Of course, first the lacing needed to be reworked to obtain the best shaping results. The shiny satin corset had nice long laces that she unknotted. She tied the very end of the 2 laces and worked the laces by pulling on the middle 2 loops so that all the extra lacing was now pulled through the middle instead of the bottom. This was something she knew from experience. In order to obtain the best hourglass figure the corset could make, you needed to be working the laces from the middle instead of the bottom of the corset. How does one get to the point that you instinctively know how to properly lace a corset? She thought to herself. She held up the beautiful black piece of lingerie and admired her handiwork. She loosened up the laces and stepped into the sumptuous corset. Even with the laces all the way out, she still had to shimmy a little bit to get it in place around her chest and midsection. She backed up close to the mirror so she could see the laces in back and found the right middle loops to begin tightening. There was a lot of lacing, so after her first pull she had a foot or so on each side to work with. It was easier to work with if you wrapped it around the front and tugged on it from there. Now that she had a little bit of a figure, it was time to move through the laces loop by loop. She pulled a couple inches through each loop, working from the bottom up to the center loops. Next she worked her way down from the top loop by loop until she reached the center again. When Heather was finally satisfied with the tightness and shape of the corset, she gave one last tug and tied the laces in a bow behind her back. She loved tightening the corset on the last pull and making it difficult for herself to breathe. She observed her new figure in the mirror and decided that she was going to have to put on the new ruffle panties if she was going to do the corset justice. The black ruffle panties fit her much as she expected. They were a little snug, just the way she liked them, and would help keep everything in control while she finished putting together the ensemble. With her new panties in place, Heather pulled up her thigh highs and began attaching them to the 8 garters dangling from the corset. She had to twist and turn several times as she struggled against the tight corset to attach each garter to the nylons. Not only was it a struggle to attach each garter, she then had to go through and adjust the length of each one. The garters had to be adjusted so they were taut. Taut garters always gave her a thrill as they registered small tugs on the nylons as she moved one way or another. She gave herself another once-over in the mirror and smiled approvingly at her new shape and look. It was a definite improvement, but there was still a bit to do. The cups of the satin corset were waiting for a little bit more. The cups were partially filled from the tightening of the corset, but she knew it could use a good bit more, so she pulled out her size C breast forms and slid them into place. She felt like she was fondling herself as she adjusted her new breasts and then pulled the shoulder straps tight. While there really was no need for shoulder straps, she appreciated the additional pull of the straps and rarely removed them. The look was really coming together now as she admired her new feminine physique in the mirror. The corset was doing its job nicely, especially when combined with the panties, breast forms and nylons. She was now ready to try her new heels on. Heather grabbed her shoes and had a seat in the new office chair. The cool leather of the chair was scintillating against her new ruffle panties, and she could feel her garters tugging this way and that when she sat in the new chair. She slipped her heels on over her nylon-covered painted toes. They felt perfect on her feet, so she decided to take a few steps around the office and try out the new 4-inch heels. It wasn't easy to operate at the new height, especially while being constricted by the satin corset. After a few minutes she seemed to have control over her walking and was thrilled the shoes fit so well. These Brian Atwood pumps were too expensive to mess around with if they didn't fit. She was so taken with the shoes that she sat back down and spent 15 to 20 minutes admiring them as she alternately dangled them on her crossed legs. Mission accomplished, she thought to herself, still admiring her feet and the shiny pumps. Sure, it was a little more work than expected to try them on, some of which was unnecessary, but she was happy since her little escape was kind of fun and the shoes that cost so much fit perfectly. Now it was time to return to the task at hand. She had completed the unpacking. Now she just needed to organize a little bit and clean up all the packages she had opened. She groaned, acknowledging that cleanup work, while an important part of this process, was far less fun than opening up new purchases. It was the sad requirement of shopping, cutting off tags, throwing away packaging, etc. If all of the newly created trash wasn't from lingerie and department stores, she would just leave it for the cleaning crew. Plus, in general, it wasn't fair to make a mess and expect someone else to clean it up. After all, it wasn't like she had a personal maid. Looking at the mess she had to clean up before the evening cleaning crew came, she realized that it would be much more enjoyable if the maid were to pick it up. Heather sauntered into the storeroom and once again opened the emergency office supplies box. First, she pulled on the fluffy white petticoat and pulled it up to her waist. She looked at herself in the mirror with all of the lace flowing out around her waist and thought the petticoat made her look like a ballerina. Not a bad look to have, she thought to herself. Next, she pulled out the black satin French maid uniform. She pulled the uniform on over her head and let the waist settle over the petticoat. She pulled her arms through each lace-trimmed sleeve and pulled it up into place. The uniform had a great neckline also trimmed in lace. It was not so low it showed cleavage and not one of those ones that go up to your chin. Heather reached back to zip up the uniform, never an easy task especially when you're laced into a restrictive corset. She thought she was going to pull her arm out of her socket trying to zip it up. She tried several times and couldn't get the zipper to move up more than a couple inches. It was a fitted French maid uniform, but it wasn't the tightness that was the problem, it was angle in which she was trying to pull the zipper. She looked at her back in the mirror and saw the little hole in the end of the zipper, which gave her an idea. It was similar to a zipper she couldn't get up on a dress years ago and recalled her ingenious solution. She grabbed a hanger out of the closet and threaded the hook through the zipper. Heather reached over her hood and grabbed the fat end of the hanger and slowly pulled it up while her other hand held the bottom of the uniform. Finally zipped into the uniform, Heather put her hands on her chest and smoothed out the uniform. It was a treat caressing herself in the shiny satin uniform that hugged all her newly formed curves. With her new look almost complete, she pulled on the silky smooth black satin opera-length gloves and adjusted the short blonde wig on her head as the finishing touch. She walked over to the mirror to get a good look at herself. It wasn't one of those jaw-dropping surprise moments for Heather. Oh sure, she had one of those "I can't believe it's really me" moments during her first makeover by a professional. She had gotten over her surprise at the way she looked years ago. Now she enjoyed working on perfecting her look. If she had to describe herself, she would have to say she looked like a sultry maid, not bad for not having her makeup yet. She twirled in front of the mirror a few times to watch her petticoat perform and then paused to admire the way her new heels reshaped her legs. Maybe this is why she hadn't dressed up in a while. She knew how good she looked and was maybe a little afraid of what would happen when she looked so convincing. Enough reminiscing, she thought it is time for maid Heather to get to work. Heather tidied up the office, putting away all the trash that had accumulated during the day in a pile to go out to dumpster. The actual cleanup couldn't have taken more than 20 minutes, leaving a few hours of the afternoon with little to do. Heather didn't want to change out of her sexy maid outfit just yet. She was enjoying herself too much. She sat at the new chair, letting her petticoat poof out when she sat down. Her ruffled panties again rubbed against the cool leather of the chair, and her heels made her knees a little higher as she pulled herself up to the desk. She jumped on the internet and began looking for chat rooms specifically about French maid uniforms. Funny how it doesn't take long to return to bad habits, she thought. Heather quickly created the username Maid Heather and was chatting with other maids within minutes. All of them shared the same French maid fetish as Heather, but they all seemed to be looking for someone to control them and order them around, well, like maids. Occasionally one of the maids would instant message her asking her what she was wearing, and she would start to get excited, telling them exactly what she had on. She never got overly excited because she knew all of these maids just wanted to get themselves off or find themselves a mistress to control their lives. All of these maids reminded her of her consulting clients. They all just wanted to be told what to do. Nobody had the guts to make any tough decisions on their own. They could always justify the restructuring or similar management shuffle they knew they needed, referring to their consulting firm's recommendation. It was their way of covering their behinds, and she was happy to provide the cover for a price. It was really all about charging a client a ridiculous amount of money so they could justify the actions they already knew they needed to take. She charged the companies to tell them what they knew they needed to do. This gave Heather an idea for a new little diversion. Since she was in the business of telling people what to do, maybe she should give it a try with all these silly maids looking for direction. She created a new username, Mistress Heather. Just because you like to dress like a maid doesn't mean you can't be the boss. She found a new chat room of crossdressers. Before she could type hello, she had 5 IMS from CDs begging to serve her. It appeared she had struck an undertapped market, and her thought was confirmed when 15 new instant messages came up on her screen while she was thinking of how to respond. She let them all wait while she thought about how something like this would work. She decided a manageable group would be about 15 people and that they all needed to be fairly attractive and in shape to keep her interest. She knew many CDs struggled with sizing, style, and body type, and she didn't want to have to deal with these issues. She also wanted to make sure her life wouldn't get too complicated in this new venture, so she determined that everyone who applied needed to live within 50 miles of her business so they all shared a general knowledge of the area. She worked in Redwood City, California, which was a great spot because her 50 miles would encompass San Jose, San Francisco, and Oakland. She responded to one on the messages and copied her reply into all of them, of which there were over 30 at this point. She instructed the potential candidates of her requirements and told them to send a picture of themselves dressed or otherwise for her to make a decision. She also told them to include a few sentences on what they liked to wear and do while dressed, and if it was a secret. Since she didn't have all day, she decided to make all interested parties reply within 30 minutes if they wanted to be considered for acceptance. Emails began to pour in, as did more instant messages. While it was a lot of messages to deal with, the first group yielded only 1 acceptable candidates. Heather was getting tired of all the effort required to weed out the undesirables and decided to reduce her class size to 10. After an hour, Heather had found her 10 and instructed them to go to a new private chat room for their initiation. She selected only closet crossdressers since their constant fear of being discovered made them easy to control. Heather started by instructing her little local group of CDs to refer to her as Miss Heather instead of Mistress Heather. It had a better ring to it. Her first task for the group was designed to give them that shopping thrill. She instructed the group to travel to the closest Victoria's Secret store by the end of the day. Once there, they were to purchase a pair of black satin panties, bra, matching garter, and a pair of black seam thigh highs. Once they purchased the items, they were to take a picture of themselves dressed in the lingerie with the tags still on to show her that they were new. Questions from the group came quickly. Does it have to be today? What if they don't have the size I need in black? Is there a deadline for sending the picture? What is the punishment if I can't finish in time? I already have these items. Do I really need to get new ones? Heather smirked at the questions from the group of sissies. She thought of them as sissies because they were acting like it, and this was only their first and probably one of their easier tasks. Her typed response was short and to the point. This task must be completed by the time I announce your next assignment. Anyone failing to complete the task will be excluded from any further participation. No more questions came. Ordering around these sissies felt great. She really got off on telling people what to do. She thought about her little sissies sweating out their first task, trying desperately to please Miss Heather. She would have to think of a way to reward them for a successful task. She slipped her satin-covered hand under the petticoat and rubbed herself through the ruffle panties. She certainly knew how to reward herself.